So I'll start by wishing you all a very good morning and a very warm welcome to this Improvement Service Children's Rights Conversation Series event. I'm Rebecca Spallon. I'm the UNCRC Project Implementation Manager at the Improvement Service. And together with my colleague Felicia, we work with local authorities to support them to get ready for what the UNCRC incorporation means for them. But a large part of the work that we do is about creating space and taking time for us to talk and think about children's rights issues and to think about the contributions that our work is making to children's rights in Scotland. And both child poverty and children's rights are key work streams for the Improvement Service. So it's really great today to be bringing these two areas of work together and to think about children's rights and child poverty together, and to think about child poverty from a human rights perspective. So this morning, I'm really delighted to see so many of you here from all across Scotland and a range of different organisations, and for you to take time to think about these key issues. And I'm really delighted that we're joined by some really fantastic speakers today. Welcome to Bill Scott, the Chair of the Poverty and Inequality Commission, Bruce Adamson, Children and Young People's Commissioner for Scotland, Lydia Murphy from the Poverty Alliance, and Martin Summers is here from Shetland Council as well. So really great to have you with us, and we're looking forward to your contributions. So we're going to start this morning is going to include a conversation event with Bill, Bruce and Lydia. And after that, we'll hear from Martin in Shetland Council about the work that they're up to. And after those sections, we'll have opportunities for you to ask your questions, share your thoughts and your comments, and just tell us about your thoughts on these issues as well. Before we move into that part of today, I wanted to draw your attention to a new paper that the Improvement Service has produced and published at the end of last week. And that focuses all about child poverty as a children's rights issue. And we encourage you to have a look at that paper, and we hope that it will support your future work on these agendas. So please feel free to share that paper with your colleagues and your partner organisations as well. But before we get to the conversations part, I think one of the really foundations to a children's rights approach to our practice is giving real and meaningful voice to children and young people. And the Child Poverty Action Group Across the School Day project really exemplifies this in the work that they do. And they've gathered some really great examples of the voices of children and young people talking about their experiences and understanding of the cost of the school day. So to get us into the right frame of mind, we're going to listen to some children and young people talk about their practice. And Felicia is going to share a little video from some children and young people as part of that Cost of the School Day project.
It's great. Nobody should feel different, like they're not as good as everyone else.
Like they're not equal to people because of their steps. Like money. You know, yeah, money.
I come with my friend on the bus, so we sit and we get our space and get our seat and get our breakfast and join other people. All of our year join together and have our breakfast in the morning. Everyone just grabs their toast and sits down and has a chat.
I come every day because I just like getting juice in the morning when it's good because everybody gets the same thing and they feel the same.
It's so everyone gets the opportunity, so you don't have to pay and waste money, and you can come for free. If we do it for free, we can all come in.
Yeah, there's a lot of other clubs through the school. It's not just the cross country. We've got the reading club, a bunch of clubs. There's homework club as well, from P1 all the way through to P7.
I think it's good so no one ever thinks like they're not the same as anyone, because they need to feel like they're a good person as well as everyone else.
I think it's good because you don't want anyone left out, because it's just unfair if someone got more than someone else.
The school gets some extra costumes and brings them in, and then the people who do not have costumes get to go in and get a costume and get changed into it. You don't have to waste your money on little things, like tiny little things, just to come to a party.
being able for Abdi to be able to enjoy themselves and nae hae the worry, oh my God, I'm going to have to go home and say that I need this, or I'm going to have to go home and say that. It is just really nice to make sure that everyone's like equal in this school, so no one's singled out at all.
That's great, thank you. And so with the voices of those children and young people in our minds, we're going to move into our conversation session. And Bill, I'm going to come to you first, and it's quite a big question, but is living free from poverty a human right?
Absolutely, it's a fundamental human right. In the aftermath of the Second World War and the devastation and genocide that saw, the countries of the world got together in the United Nations and adopted a universal declaration of human rights. And I'd like to quote from that: everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of himself, still gendered then, and of his family, including food, clothing, housing and medical care and necessary social services, and the right to security in the event of unemployment, sickness, disability, widowhood, old age or other lack of livelihood in circumstances beyond their control. Motherhood and childhood are entitled to special care and assistance. All children, whether born in or out of wedlock, shall enjoy the same social protection. And I'd also like to quote Article 14 of the Universal Declaration: everyone has the right to seek and to enjoy in other countries asylum from persecution. And that's because I want everybody to understand that no child is an illegal child, and everyone is entitled to an adequate standard of living. Just watching those children was very moving, because those children, it's love one another instinctively. We put the barriers there between them of race and religion and wealth. And if we just took the kids' example, we would have a much better world. Research by the Food Foundation shows that the right to children to be protected from poverty isn't being observed in the UK at the moment. 4 million children went hungry at some point in January. And we know that damages their health, their education, their life chances, and in the long term, their life expectancy, with males from our poorest communities living on average 14 years less than those from our most affluent communities. And that gap has been increasing in recent years rather than diminishing. So poverty is a killer just as surely as war and disease. It just takes longer. And that's why it has to be tackled. And that's why it has to be one of the fundamental human rights that we observe. And I'll leave it to Bruce on the UNCRC, because he knows far more and has fought far harder for it to be included and incorporated in Scots law.
Thanks, Bill. Bruce, I'll come to you next then, and I suppose just focusing a little bit more on poverty as a children's rights issue. Can you share some thoughts on that with us?
Absolutely. Hi everyone, and I just want to endorse everything that Bill was saying there, and the really important work that Bill and others have been doing on this, because poverty is absolutely a human rights issue, and there's a broad array of international human rights treaties stemming from the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, which Bill was quoting there, that are really relevant to children's rights. But the Convention on the Rights of the Child is really special because it brings together all of the civil, political, economic, social and cultural rights all together in a special treaty focused just on children, everyone up to the age of 18, recognising the distinct obligations that we owe to them. They don't have the same economic or political power as adults. They're a special stage of development, and that's been recognised right back from the earliest days of the international system, with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights focusing on childhood and motherhood. And so it took a bit longer. It took until 1989 to get a special children's treaty. But the Children's Treaty, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, is something that's really powerful, and it's exciting that we're very close to having this incorporated into our domestic law in Scotland. A few years ago, on the 30th anniversary of the Convention, we'd asked children to use just 7 words to describe why rights were important to them. And one child came up with this one, which is really beautiful, which was freedom from poverty helps all children flourish. And I think we saw that so strongly in the voices of children that we started today with, that sense that this was something that we should look after each other and we should all be together, and that this was a common purpose of ensuring that we fought against poverty. Another 7-word story, which I thought was really useful in our discussions, are rights are help before you even asked. Because addressing poverty shouldn't be about acts of charity, as kind and as welcome as they are. It's about a human right, and it's about an entitlement. The state has a duty to ensure that children don't go hungry or poorly clothed or cold. And Philip Alston, the former Special Rapporteur on extreme poverty, when he came to Scotland a few years ago, in his very scathing report about the UK government, but also with recommendations to the Scottish government and local authorities, highlighted that allowing child poverty to continue was a political choice and a political failure. And so we need to take this incredibly seriously. As Bill said, child poverty affects every aspect of children's lives, and the impact can last lifetime. So the particular rights that are engaged, and I would really draw your attention to the Understanding Child Poverty as a Children's Rights Issue paper that the Improvement Service has produced, because I think it's wonderfully done in highlighting these rights issues. So if you haven't had a chance to read that yet, please do. I think it's a wonderful piece of work. But when we think about children's rights, looking at the right to an adequate standard of living, and so that includes good nutritious food, a safe warm home, appropriate clothing. Children have the right to have their family supported and to benefit from social security. And so recognising that the levers for social security exist in different parts of the system at UK, at Scottish and at local level, that right's really important, getting money into families. And particular rights protections around disabled or care experienced young people and those seeking refuge as well are built into the convention, as well as broader responsibility to those whose rights are most at risk. In making decisions as public bodies at every level, the obligation to make decisions in the best interest of the child. So that's from setting budgets or through to individual decisions. That's really important. That's a particular right that children have, that every decision should be in their best interest. And the right to participation, which you'll all be familiar with, that children should be involved not only in relation to decisions that affect them directly in terms of their own individual needs, but also at a societal level. And those being strongly linked also to an obligation on the state at all levels to use all available resources to the maximum extent possible to fulfill children's economic, social and cultural rights. This is really important because the argument isn't that we need to create additional resource. The argument is you've got to use all of the available resource that you have at that time to the best possible maximum extent possible. And I think we'll come on, to talking about rights-based budgeting and things, because the impact of poverty cuts across children's rights, right through to the right to life and survival and development. Poverty is a right to life issue. The impacts of childhood poverty can affect children directly in terms of the right to life, but right through survival and development, the right to the highest attainable standard of health, including mental health, and we know the significant physical and mental health impacts on poverty, the right to an education which develops them to their fullest potential. We know the impact on poverty on your ability to access all parts of learning within school and out with school as well. And also the right to rest, play, leisure and access to cultural activities, which are really essential to development. And we saw, particularly during COVID, the impact of that right being denied to children through poor housing, food insecurity, hugely damaging. The right to social connections and to access information. Again, we saw, particularly in COVID, that the lack of access to technology had a massive impact. And some of the stigma points, I think, as well, that the young people raised so well in the video. I could go on and on, Rebecca. I know I should probably stop about here, but I'm going to make a couple more points. It's a massive political failure that we have a quarter of children in Scotland being directly affected. This isn't something that's happening in other countries. This is something that's happening absolutely right now. And we cannot accept children going hungry, living in unsuitable housing and without clothing and the basic needs for life. And the impact that this has on some particular groups of children, disabled children, young carers, care experienced children, children of prisoners, Black and minority ethnic children, but also lone parent families, those with very young children, larger families. this is hitting different families and different children in different ways. And the energy crisis that is deepening this impact is hugely concerning. We can maybe come back to talking about that, but focusing on the fact that poverty is not inevitable. It's a political choice, and it's a decision. It's a consequence of decisions made by the UK and Scottish governments, and we need to make sure that we're acting at every level of government to address poverty as a human rights issue. One child told us, and I'll finish with this, that they felt that poverty robbed them of their childhoods. They said the most unfair thing is that governments know that families are going through hard times, but they decide not to do anything about it. And so as a society, we can't accept this. I'm really looking forward to continuing to build on some of these points as well, but I realize I shouldn't just ramble on at the first question. So I'll pass it back to you, Rebecca.
No, and I think thank you for that comprehensive answer to that, and I think reminding us of the articles that are at play. But I think really important to remind ourselves of the range of levers that are available and that we need to be looking at and to use to tackle the issue. And we know particularly local authorities and health boards present their actions annually in their local child poverty action reports, and sometimes it can feel quite difficult to move away from some of the mitigating factors into the real kind of causal factors at local level as well. So thank you for reminding us of how to frame that in different ways to help us think that through. I was going to pick up with you on the issue of children's rights budgeting as a tool that local authorities could potentially use. And we know that the financial circumstances out there are particularly tough, and there is a cost of living crisis that's affecting families that use services, but also the delivery of the services themselves as well in terms of energy provision and things like that. So can you tell us a little bit about children's rights budgeting and how that can potentially help at local level to progress this agenda?
Absolutely, and I think that the use of things like children's rights budgeting or children's rights impact assessments are really powerful tools to be able to demonstrate the fulfillment of that obligation to use available resources to the maximum extent possible. So using these tools, a rights-based approach is really essential to ensure efficient and legitimate decision making. And we know that by using these tools and doing proper rights-based budgeting, you have better outcomes in rights terms, but also better outcomes in economic terms, because the failure to do this, and particularly where some of the cuts are falling at the moment, is in my view very short-sighted, because it creates additional pressures further on in health, education, justice, everywhere. We know that by failing to focus on rights, it makes no economic sense. The Committee on the Rights of the Child has a general comment on public budgeting, which is really useful, and they highlight a number of things that would be worth mentioning. So firstly, that children should be really visible in budgets. So you need to make sure that you're identifying the direct impact on children, ensure that you can demonstrate that you're making decisions in children's best interests. So children have to be identifiable and visible within budgets. Because we know that children's voice often gets lost, and so having a specific focus on the visibility of children is really important. The important right that children have to participate in decision making is really important, Article 12. So their views must be heard in the budget process, and so there needs to be meaningful mechanisms for children's participation. And I think in Scotland there's some really good emerging practice. It worried me hugely that during COVID we stopped doing it, because I think pre-COVID Scotland had actually made some really good progress in children's participation, and a lot of local authority decision makers, I think, we're doing really well at actually engaging directly with children and young people. COVID hits and we put it all to one side, and I think that worries me that it was kind of seen as an optional extra rather than something that was essential to legitimate decision making. And I'm not sure we've got it back kind of as we move kind of out of the worst of COVID, particularly with the financial pressures at the moment, that children's voices aren't being prioritised. I think that's really important. And so making information available to ensure budget transparency is a really important part of that. It's a prerequisite for meaningful participation. That children, young people, but also families need to understand what the parameters are for the budget setting, and are able to engage with it in a really meaningful way. one of their young advisors actually had a really good quote, which they said, "I think it's important that we consult children on the amount of money that they're spending per service or between service, because sometimes it feels like you don't know where the money's going and they put a lot of money into something and that's failing. We're the ones using these services and we can have first-hand accounts of what's going on." So I think that's really important. It's focusing on the fact that in assessing and evaluating the impacts of service delivery, children's voices are really, really important there. Also, children and young people can be part of identifying specific examples of spending cuts as well. I think that's really interesting. That we've got some good examples where children aren't necessarily going to say we just want more and more money. They're actually really good at understanding that choices need to be made, and making those decisions about where money should go. And so that's really important, that we link in there through helping them understand what's going on, being really transparent, and proper kind of participation are absolutely essential to rights-based budgeting. And I think strongly linked to rights-based budgeting is the use of children's rights impact assessments and children's rights impact evaluation. So impact assessment is as you're making a decision, evaluation after the fact. They've got very, very similar processes, but slightly different focuses. And I think that there was some really good work that we've done in East Lothian as a key project called Listen, Engage and Have Fun, which we did last year and year before. And I think that I'd refer you to that. I think the guide that was produced as part of that gives some really practical advice in terms of the process. There's also a European-wide framework which fed into that local example that I'd refer you to as well, as I think a really powerful piece of work in terms of how you use impact assessment. So what I would say is that there's some interesting tools that are being developed, which is great, but this is still pretty new, I think, even globally. And so the work that we've done at the European level was to try and help that. But I think that we're all still learning from this. And so what I'm really keen to do as part of this conversation, other conversations, is start to highlight how people are using these tools and how we can develop and change the tools over time. Because the key thing about rights-based budgeting and the key thing about the use of tools like impact assessments is they have to be practical, they have to be usable, and they have to demonstrate that they're delivering those results. It's not just that there's some abstract rules that you have to follow in terms of rights. It's the point of this is to improve children's lives and have more efficient and legitimate decision making. And so these tools have to be practical. And so the conversations with all of you are really important to this, because if the tools aren't practical, they're not going to work.
That's great, Bruce. Thank you. And I love that idea of also involving children in potential cuts to services as well. And I think children and young people often have quite a unique insight into the cumulative impact of budget cuts across a different range of services, because quite often they use a number of different services that maybe adults aren't kind of have sight of as well. So that cumulative impact of budget decisions is really key as well. And I think we'll share the link to that resource after today or in the chat as well. So Lydia, I'm going to come to you next. And we'd really like to hear a little bit more about your Rights in Action project. And we know that as part of the work that you're doing, you are co-designing and delivering workshops with children and young people about their rights. And we'd love to hear some of your insights into how you go about doing that, and what the children and young people are speaking to you about in these conversations.
Thank you. So kind of fundamental starting point from all of our work is the idea that poverty represents a breach of our human rights, and our Rights in Action project is about raising awareness of that relationship, with a particular focus on economic, social and cultural rights, which are predominantly found in the Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, but also the UNCRC. So our project has involved kind of human rights education and workshops with adults, but recently I have co-designed and delivered a workshop with young people, and we're looking at expanding that part of the project. So the way that has worked is it's been through a relationship with a Roma youth organisation called Romana Lab, and it was built on a relationship that we established as part of our wider Rights in Action project. And I think when I went into the process, it was always with the understanding that we needed to be equal partners in designing this event, and that I could, sorry, I would be able to bring my kind of human rights knowledge, but I needed to share that with them from the get-go. And then it was up to both of us, well, all of us, not both of us, there's 3 of us, about how we were going to present that to young people. And so it was really important that I made sure that people were given an opportunity to express their view, that I facilitated a safe space for that to happen, that they were listened to, and that we kind of followed them where they wanted it to go. And so we did that by having a workbook with information, and then me asking the question, how do you want to do this? And kind of going from there. And so we ended up with a 2-hour session where we covered key issues around where rights come from. We talked about the Holocaust, and in particular, the kind of systematic murder of Roma people. And we talked about really difficult issues that the Roma community were facing through a rights-based lens. And with the young people's support, we ended up with a 2-hour session that only had 2 5-minute presentations, and the rest of it was done through activities. We were acting, there were bouncy balls. It was very, very active. And I think a kind of key benefit of working with young people is just the fact that it's better. So when we think about taking a human rights-based approach, a really key part of that is empowerment, and the idea that young people know what their rights are. And the best people to communicate that are other young people, because they're going to use language that's accessible. They're going to have ideas that I might not have. And so in that way, I think it is a really kind of effective way to do that. And I guess a key indicator that I felt that showed its effectiveness is when I initially designed a workshop for young people, I had one activity where we got moving and the rest was all kind of discussion based, and it didn't have acting, and it didn't have bouncy balls, and it didn't have all the things that keep the energy up. And although it did the same job of facilitating really difficult conversations, it just wasn't as fun. And there also wasn't the initial empowerment of young people to know their rights that happen when you work with young people to create something. And so we're looking at seeing how we can kind of expand that work, because it was really positive. And when we spoke at the end of the session, one of the young people, we were reflecting on the fact that there isn't a coherent kind of Roma rights movement in the UK for young people. And one of the young people at the end was like, well, why isn't it us? It could be us. And that was just the kind of dream outcome of having a situation where young people feel like they know their rights, but also they want to think about how we can support those moving forward and how they can fight for those. And so I think that was a really interesting outcome of that part of the project.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that with us. And I think that the importance of that energy level is really important, isn't it? And making it fun and engaging, and recognizing that that doesn't take away from the quality of the outcome that you've got at the end, which I think sometimes as adults we fear if we're having too much fun, we can't be doing any work. So that's a really good and important reminder for us. So thank you for sharing that with us. Bill, I'm going to come back to you now. The question around the Poverty and Inequality Commission's work on the Child Poverty Scrutiny Report last year. Can you tell us a little bit more about the key findings of that report? And I know that as part of that, you worked with the Commissioner's Office and with Aberlour to get young people's voices and perspectives. So it'd be really good to hear how did you bring that report together, and what were the children and young people saying to you about poverty and their experiences in Scotland?
Yeah, I mean, we're extremely grateful to Children's Commissioner's Office and to Aberlour for the help they gave us last year in ensuring that young people, got their say on Scottish Government's progress, but also their ideas about how that progress could be made even further and better in future years. We set up meetings with young people, but we also heard from other groups. But I think the voices of children, as Bruce said, have to be central to everything that we do. So the young people told us that poverty was a really important issue to them, and they felt that it was essential to deal with poverty in order to achieve a fairer and more equal Scotland, which was something they all wanted to see, and I'm sure we do as well. They told us very powerfully, just as you heard in the short film, that poverty acts as a barrier to children getting the help that they need and the support they're entitled to, such as free school meals. And it also leads to children being excluded from school trips or punished, even on occasion, for not being able to afford school uniforms. And their views were very, very central to informing our scrutiny report on progress and the recommendations we made around Scottish child payment, free school meals, school clothing grants, and free bus transport for under 22s. Now, to give you a wee bit of insight into the scrutiny report itself, we did recognise that there were real problems with the data that we had to hand and that Scottish Government have at the moment, because the pandemic has really impacted on statistical returns from the people who are living in poverty, and that means that the data is a wee bit unreliable, and it's possibly going to be even worse this year than last year, and that makes it difficult to measure progress. But what the Commission found on the basis of the evidence we did have and on what people on the ground were telling us is that the action taken so far just might get the Scottish Government over the line in terms of relative poverty. And that's an interim target of around 18% of children living in poverty. And that's largely because of the Scottish child payment being adopted. It's going to make a significant difference. But we thought it was unlikely they were going to meet their final child poverty reduction targets for 2030 based just on the actions they've taken so far. We also thought that it's still possible that they might miss the interim targets for absolute poverty and material deprivation, which are really, really important, because relative poverty is just a measure against your standing in comparison to everybody else in society. But absolute poverty and material deprivation, as we've said already, really impact on children's well-being and health. So we thought that the further commitments that the Scottish Government made in the child poverty, the new child poverty delivery plan, should help the Scottish Government make progress. But the changes that are outlined in it are going to have to be delivered at pace and scale right across society. And we've all got a role to play, because in tackling poverty, we need to tackle some of the structural barriers that are preventing people lifting themselves out of poverty. And that's low pay, which is endemic across our society, underemployment, particularly amongst the priority groups and families, and the cost of housing is still significantly impacting on many low-income, and now increasingly on what would have previously been considered middle-income families. And finally, in terms of tackling the structural barriers, we don't think it's going to be achieved without human rights being placed at the heart of poverty reduction. And that means not just informing the policies within government, but implementation on the ground. And that's where the Improvement Service, local authorities that are here represented here today, it's your allies in this. And if you do adopt a human rights approach, as Bruce has outlined, it'll go a long way to making implementation on the ground much more effective. And we urged the Scottish Government to adopt the panel principles, which are the ones that we try to adhere to ourselves, and why we wanted to involve children and young people, but also adults who live in poverty themselves. So panel principles, participation, as we keep on emphasising, accountability. We've got to hold government, local government, and ourselves to account. And the best way of doing that is to involve the people at the sharp end. They'll tell us whether we're getting it right or wrong. non-discrimination, obviously, empowerment. People living in our low-income communities know what some of the answers are. They need to be empowered to by ourselves to put some of those ideas into practice and action, because they know what works and what doesn't work for them. So empowerment is really important. And lastly, legality, and we're coming back to why rights are fundamental. So put the panel principles into effect in your work on the ground, and you'll make a real difference. And that's what we urged on Scottish Government. And I'm glad to say they've now got a Child Poverty Programme Board, which within government is holding the Scottish Government to account and monitoring progress. And we're, as I said earlier, we're all allies here today, and it's great to have the Poverty Allies involved and Improvement Service and all the colleagues for local government, etc. I just wanted to say a final thanks, because it may be my last opportunity, to Bruce, who's been such a fantastic ally in the fight against poverty during his time as Children's Commissioner. And we are going to miss you, Bruce. And it's difficult to imagine anybody can be as good a friend as you've been to the whole movement against poverty in Scotland. But I'm hoping that a good replacement is going to be found for you. Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks, Bill, and thank you for those words. I think we would all echo that, Bruce, and really speaking a lot about child poverty over your time as Commissioner has really kind of elevated the issue. So thank you for that. A question, I suppose, for all of you, and something that I think is quite an interesting one in terms of the participation of children and young people, and at local authority level, very aware of the need to gather lived experience and to kind of really listen to the voices of everybody experiencing poverty, or who fear that poverty isn't far from their door. But it can be quite a difficult conversation to start, and even to begin to find people who are willing to talk about their experience, but also be mindful of their dignity and the right to their dignity as well. So I'm wondering, from your experience of working directly with children and young people, and Lydia, through your work with adults as well, whether a rights lens makes that conversation easier to have and easier to start. If you've got any perspectives that you could share that might help people who are trying to maybe start this work locally.
I'm happy to come in on that. So as part of my Rights in Action project, as well as kind of starting the youth workshops, we've also been delivering workshops with community organisations and people who are experiencing poverty. And I found that using a rights-based lens allows people to talk about issues that are impacting them without the feelings of shame that can be associated with experiencing poverty or experiencing really bad housing issues. Because when we talk about human rights, we're talking about the responsibilities of the state towards us and the responsibility of our public bodies towards us. And so if we're experiencing the impact of poverty, or we're not able to access our rights to an adequate standard of living, or to health, or all of those other kind of key rights that we spoke about earlier, that's not something that should be shameful. And we've had it when I've been having conversations with people, they've spoken to me particularly around housing issues that they said that they hadn't actually spoken to anyone about before because it was a source of such shame. And so I think a rights-based lens can kind of remove that shame. And it's also been really useful in our kind of workshops, particularly with adults, to look at rights and be like, so what are the barriers? What are the barriers that we see to the realisation of these rights? And it can allow people to talk about key issues in their communities, but in a way that is a little bit detached. And so you can deal with really difficult issues in a kind of quite sensitive way, and also in a way that feels like it's moving towards action, which I think is quite important for people.
Could I come in there as well?
That's great. And Bruce, yeah.
Yeah, I think I strongly agree with what Lydia was saying there, and what Bill's been saying. And thanks, Bill. You've kind of bring me to tears in terms of leaving this job is going to be very difficult. But one of the huge pleasures of being Children's Commissioner over the last 6 years has been the incredible human rights defenders like you, Bill, and Lydia and Rebecca, and everyone who's been involved working in Scotland is a huge pleasure, despite the real challenges. And in fact, right this moment, there are children in the Parliament interviewing the candidates for my successor. Those interviews are taking place today. So we should know in a month or so who the new commissioner is, but children are actually involved in that process, grilling the potential candidates, grilling the candidates to today. So there's an adult interview separately to that, but I think the candidates will probably be more challenged by the questions from the children and young people, if my experience is anything to go by. And I think that's really important. And the reason that over the last 6 years I focused so much on poverty is because it was an issue that children and young people asked me to focus on. I didn't come in with this as a preconceived strategic priority. Well, I had my own ideas. This was because in the conversations that I had with children and young people all across Scotland, this, alongside mental health and climate justice, were the three big issues that children in every single community in Scotland recognised as a human rights issue. And Lindsay Graham, who's a commissioner from the Poverty and Inequality Commission, actually contacted me in the day that I was appointed and said, you need to come with me out to Dundee and see some of the projects and do some work with Trussell Trust and others. And look at food insecurity. So these issues have been raised by children in communities. And I think what's really important is that we have to avoid this idea that we can't talk to children about rights issues which affect them. They're living this every single day. Of course, we have to do it in a way that's take a rights-based approach and support them, and to do it appropriately and in a way that doesn't further stigmatize them or traumatize them. But the idea that we can't engage them is totally wrong. They're living this and they want to be involved in the solutions. And I think it's really important as we frame this as a rights issue, is taking away the stigma and the idea that this is about individual choices or responsibility or fault, and shaping this as government obligation is really important. But also moving away from the idea that this is some kind of charity. Children who are experiencing poverty and other children want to be involved in the solutions. They want to be seen as rights holders who are involved in the solutions. That this shouldn't be seen as something as kind of pity or charity. This is about involving them because they've got a right to be involved, and that they've got a right to challenge those of us that are in power for not doing enough to address poverty as a rights issue. And so I think that's really important. And the one other point I'd quickly make, because I was asked this by a young person just a couple of days ago around whether I thought that we'd made improvements over the 6 years that I've been in post in relation to poverty and mental health, and that's quite a challenging question, given that the outcomes for children have possibly been worse for a whole bunch of reasons. But one of the things that I think is really interesting is that I've seen a change in the way in which the media reports poverty, the way in which we discuss poverty in the context of these types of policy discussions, much more willing to use a rights framework, much less stigmatizing. And I think we're starting to build some of the tools to have these discussions. And I think despite the fact that we haven't delivered on the change, and some of that's due to external factors, what I'm really hopeful about is that I think the way in which we talk about poverty and the tools that we're using to make decisions are starting to change. And I think that gives us real hope in terms of moving forward. But certainly when we've had these conversations, and when we brought the special rapporteur, Philip Alston, over, and he was visiting schools and sitting on the floor and with the paints and things with some very young children, their willingness to discuss what was going on in their lives with the most senior human rights expert on poverty in a really creative way was really exciting. And that then leads right directly into their voices being in his report to the United Nations, and the challenge that we can then use to lever change from the UK government, the Scottish government, and how we can improve things at local authorities. That's really, really powerful. And as Lydia said before, it's fun as well. You're allowed to have fun when you're talking about really difficult subjects, and in fact you should be having fun talking about these difficult subjects, because that brings us all out of our shells and lets us all be more creative and come up with solutions. There shouldn't be stigma. We shouldn't be ashamed of this. Well, those in power should be, but those experiencing poverty should never be ashamed by it, and it's about giving them the tools to help be part of that change.
Fantastic. Thank you both for that insight, and I think some really key messages to take back at local level as well. I've got one more question before you can draw breath. And Bruce, it is one for you primarily, and it is about the UNCRC legislation that is pending. And the question really is, what difference will the legislation make in terms of child poverty, and what will that mean at local level as well? Another big question. Sorry.
Yeah, I'll try and people have probably heard me speak about this at length, so I'll try and be as quick as I can. The incorporation of the Convention on the Rights of the Child into our domestic law is, in my view, the most important thing we can do in legislative terms to improve children's rights. And so exactly 2 years ago, the Scottish Parliament unanimously passed the law, and it's a really strong law. What it does is, to the maximum extent possible within devolved competence, bring those international rights concepts, which already exist in Scots law, that already exist in terms of their rights that we're already obliged to fulfill. So it's not about putting new rights. It's about taking the rights that we already know and giving them additional legal strength. Lots of these rights are already contained within different parts of our domestic law on housing, on education, on health. And so none of these things are kind of new or foreign. What it does, though, is puts them right into the domestic legal framework in a much stronger way. And so what it means is that public bodies wouldn't be able to act incompatibly. So similar to the Human Rights Act, which covers mainly civil and political rights, it extends those types of protections out to all of the rights that children have. And so what's new about it is particularly the economic, social, and cultural rights in the convention. The broad holistic approach to rights all becomes incorporated into law. And if you were looking at that from the kind of the sharp legal side of it, it means that these rights are justiciable. So it means that my office or children and those that support them would be able to challenge public authorities and have that level of accountability that Bill talked about earlier in terms of a rights-based approach, and go to court if we felt that that rights weren't being respected, protected, and fulfilled. But what we see in other countries which have already incorporated the convention, so there's lots of other countries that have already incorporated the convention. Some do so automatically when they ratify international law. Some need to do domestic law like we do to bring it in, but lots and lots of other countries have already done this. And what we tend to see is not a big rush to court, but rather a sustained and kind of systemic change in the way that decisions are made. Because if you're being held to account against something, and you're a budget holder, suddenly you look at the risks a bit differently. And so what we would expect to see is all of the stuff that we're discussing today, that there'd be much more thought around how you can demonstrate that rights around best interest, rights around participation, rights, obligations around demonstrating that you've used available resources to the maximum extent possible, things like rights-based budgeting and impact assessment, those really good practical tools, we would want to be seeing those more in evidence. And so what you wouldn't be able to litigate on if you were my office, my successor, you can't come in and say you've not fixed the housing crisis tomorrow. That's not what the test is. The test is about progressive realization. Have you done what you can to put in place the things that will deliver that change over time in a sustained way? So this isn't something to be afraid of. This is something that helps support that cultural change, and you can use to lever some of those difficult barriers that we get in budget discussions and others, to say no, there's a legal obligation here. So it strengthens your ability to leverage some of that change at domestic level. And the other things within the bill which are really useful are additional requirements in relation to planning and reporting and evaluation. So that framework's really useful as well, because again, we know that the things that we're tested against are the things that we tend to do, and so having that process in place helps that along as well, and helps also with the kind of sharing of best practice. There's a bunch of other things in the law around the way in which the courts will interpret rights and things like that, but that's probably not where I would place the focus. Also, you're probably all aware that the Supreme Court 18 months ago said that there were 4 sections within the bill that went further than the Scottish Parliament had power to do, and those related to where this law was going to apply to legislation passed by Westminster, but on devolved issues, but prior to devolution. So there was a mess there, and Supreme Court said that reconsideration was needed. I've been very public in my criticism of the Scottish Government for the delay over the last 18 months, and probably this isn't the place to go further into that, but the Children's Minister did write to Parliament on Thursday last, which was the 2nd year anniversary of the Parliament passing the bill, and said that they're in the final weeks of negotiation with the UK government and that they hope to have the bill back before Parliament before the summer. I would expect that process to be very quick. I don't think there's huge need for a lot of debate in Parliament for these technical amendments. And then the latest that it would come into effect would be 6 months after royal assent, presuming it wasn't challenged again by the UK government. And there is a power within the bill that the Scottish Parliament could bring a commencement earlier than that 6 months. I've asked for immediate commencement. The government doesn't seem minded towards that. But I would say that we do seem to be near the point where it will be back in Parliament. And so that may well be before the summer recess. And if so, then we would expect this to be enforced by the end of the year. But it's certainly not something to be afraid of. It's really a powerful tool that will help deliver really kind of sustained change. And we've seen that in the other countries that have brought forward incorporation legislation, or the great many countries who have this as a matter of constitution, that when they sign up to international law, it automatically becomes enforceable domestically. So so this is a great opportunity, and I'm very happy to discuss it at length in other spaces. So if you want to know more, please do feel free to get in touch.
That's great, Bruce. Thank you. And thank you for framing that so constructively as well. And for the local authority colleagues who are on the call, Felice and I are very happy to have a chat with you about how we can support you with your work as well. And colleagues in the Children's Rights Unit. I think Leslieanne's popped a link in the chat to Ms. Hoy's letter last week as well, if you've not seen that already. So I'm going to let you draw breath. Thank you all so much for answering my question so comprehensively. Yeah, draw breath, and we'll come back to you with questions from our general audience after we've heard from Martin in Shetland Council. Martin, are you there? Are you ready to tell us a little bit more about the work that you've been doing in Shetland with your Youth Voices Forum?
Yeah, hi Rebecca. Morning everyone. Just a few minutes until the afternoon so I can get that morning message in. I'm actually going to be joined by my colleague Louis Peterson, who's on the call today as well. So Louis is going to contribute to some of the discussion and input that we'll be having this morning. So I just wanted to start by setting the context, and I think we have some slides we're hoping to share as well, that very much the viewpoint that we take within youth work here in Shetland as part of the Children's Services team within Shetland Islands Council. It's about making sure that young people are at the heart of these decision-making processes that we're involved in here in Shetland. They are the ones with the lived experience, and it's so essential that they're part of the solution, and rather than always being seen as part of the problem. And unfortunately, during COVID, we saw a heightened situation where young people were often at the forefront of blame in our community, and actually we didn't take the opportunity to realise that they were contributing to a huge amount here in Shetland, but also wider across Scotland. I think as well as that, to set a scene as well, somewhere like Shetland, it's really important to recognise that we have an awful lot of hidden poverty. That's important to recognise. The cost of living here in the islands, for example, is a lot higher than other areas of Scotland, and that can push more and more families into poverty, and that is very much what we're seeing now with the cost of living crisis that we've got going on. The presentation that Louis will take you through will showcase how we're hoping to build capacity within our children and young people, supporting them through youth work, and making sure that we in youth work work alongside children and young people to become that human rights defenders, because I think that that's key with everything that we do within the work that we take forward. So I'm going to hand over to Louis to take you through the initial presentation, and then there's going to be other elements that we're going to come on and talk through around how we are hoping and helping to contribute poverty here in the islands. So over to you, Louis.
Thanks, Martin. Yeah, I'm Louis Peterson. I work with the Youth and Employability Service for Shetland Islands Council and also the school service. I think I recognise a few names and a few faces from other forums. We had Bruce here in Shetland not long ago as well, so hello Bruce again. As Martin said, we're going to focus a bit more on the participation side of things. If we could go to the first slide, please, Felicia. This is essentially what we put in our one of the participation parts of our poverty report in, I think it was 2021, 2022, and already a lot of this is out of date, and we'll explain a little bit about how our aspirations have changed and what the reality is as well. If we go to the next slide. So basically a few years ago, we decided that we weren't really doing enough in terms of youth participation in Shetland. The voices weren't diverse enough. There was initially a lot of school involvement in things like youth participation. We have our MSYPs, we have pupil councils, but we felt we wanted to open it up more. We wanted more focus. We applied for coastal communities funding, which meant we could pay for a graduate placement that would focus on youth participation in UNCRC. The idea was to create a structure that we could then sustain afterwards that would involve representing young people geographically, but also have partners. So we have representation from agencies such as Who Cares Scotland, Ability Shetland, and a range of age as well with young people, so that we can get as diverse a mix of voices as possible. But the other side of that is that not just getting the voices of young people, but also teaching staff how to listen to voices, and how to kind of embed active listening across different sectors of our council and other public bodies in Shetland. So part of that role for our kind of youth service is also to be kind of help engagement between young people and different public bodies. We get the next slide, please. This is a sort of a visual representation of how our Youth Voice Forum is structured. So what we do is we try and get our secondary departments and secondary schools to have representation, but we also make sure that we have other specialist groups and groups that are kind of advocates for voices that are maybe not always represented. What I would say is that we've probably, and I'll come to this later, we seem to get more diverse views now, and we get more diverse young people involved. What we're actually struggling with maybe more now is getting school engagement, whereas it used to be the opposite. And there's a few reasons that we'll come to about that. We get the next slide, please. So we've got our youth voice. This is just a few pictures of meetings that we've had. Just going to tell you a little bit more about that. We've got, I think, up to 40 people have been involved in the Youth Voice Forum so far. That sounds like a high number, and for Shetland that probably is a high number. However, getting consistency and getting young people engaged regularly is an issue that we do sometimes find. Some of the work that we've engaged with this has been mental health, which has been an issue that young people are coming to us with. Places that they can socialise, which is something that's come after COVID. A big issue that they want somewhere warm, they want somewhere that has Wi-Fi, and they want somewhere that's not structured. So that's something that Martin will maybe explain a bit more about how we've been trying to react to that need from young people. One of the things that the Youth Voice Forum has been working on here has been how young people get access to things, how young people get, for example, from an island in the north of Shetland to an event in Lerwick, our main town. this is something that rural communities and isles, it's maybe more unique to us, but again, it's when we speak about poverty, Shetland is seen as a relatively wealthy place, as Martin touched on, but it means that when somebody does experience living in poverty, it's even more isolating to them. It's even more of a stigma. And our role, I suppose, is listening to those young people and making sure that there is access to things. And sometimes it is literal getting off an island. Sometimes it is literally traveling that 50-mile journey from the north end of Shetland to get to an event that we're putting on as a service for young people. If we get to the next slide, please. We're kind of, because I'm very conscious of time, we're going to get to, I suppose, the crux of what we're wanting to say. But the last few years, we are hearing about UNCRC from a management level, from a kind of higher level. I think that in terms of us engaging with young people, we are getting more diverse voices. We are engaging with young people that have that lived experience, as Martin touched on. We are getting more organisations, more public bodies, more other departments of the council coming to us wanting to hear from young people. And I think it's great that we are having these discussions that we are today about UNCRC, about poverty, and that it is becoming a crucial part of any decision making in public authorities. However, a lot of what we're saying is aspirational, and I think these are some, we'll come to the challenges just now. Felicia, if you can get the next slide. For whatever reason, schools letting people get out of class time, letting young people actually, just that practicalities of getting young people into a space where they can engage in decision-making practices is something we're finding quite difficult. I don't know if that's a national thing or if that's just unique to Shetland, but just getting that voice, capturing that voice, the practicalities of that is something we've been struggling with. Something that might be more unique to Shetland, for youth work, for schools, all children's services, staff and recruitment is a challenge. Having that staff capacity to do all this is crucial, and it is that those basics, whether it's poverty, UNCRC, having the staff and having the skilled staff is crucial to anything we do. Another thing that we found is that we have so many organisations wanting young people's voice, or wanting to look like they're listening to young people, I suppose you would say. But mapping it out is something that maybe needs to be done a bit more from a strategic level and from a top level. We have in Shetland, for example, we have quite a small population of young people, about 3,000. It's very easy to overburden them in engaging with some of these activities. The same voices sometimes get trotted out. Sometimes the same young people are having to engage, and sometimes they're doing it, they don't actually want to do it, and we have to respect their right to decide for themselves if they want to take part in these kind of youth participation. Sorry, I'm hearing somebody's. That's better. I think we have to respect the right for young people not to participate as well. We are we're in circumstances just now where our young people in Shetland, for example, we've had a lot of disruption, whether it be weather, whether it be strikes. We've got a lot of young people stressing out right now about exams, about assessments, and sometimes they don't want to actually take part in some of the activities that we're doing, and that's absolutely fine. We have to respect that. But I think sometimes it doesn't help that a lot of organisations maybe don't join up their thinking. So we end up asking young people the same question about 5 or 6 times, whether it be from a government level or from a local authority level, or from whether it's a question about the curriculum or whether it's questions about exams. I don't think we always map it out properly, and I think it's something that certainly in a small community like Shetland we need to be better at. And so yeah, I think I've summarised the opportunities and challenges there, and I think it's just aspirations versus reality maybe when it comes to actually carrying a lot of this forward. Martin, I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add as well?
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on a point that Bruce made around incorporation being a major opportunity for us, and I think within authorities like ourselves here in the council, it's an opportunity to see how we can take incorporation and allow for us to look at the change that we want to make here in the islands for children and young people. And for example, the UNCRC is now part of our change programme here in Shetland, and we are taking that forward across the council, because I think it's very easy to see this as something that will sit with youth work or sit within children's services. Actually, this is something that all staff within local authorities are going to have to get their head around. So we're working across the authority as part of that change programme, including colleagues in the likes of our corporate service, to be able to see how we can strengthen the work that we're doing here in the islands. I suppose I would just want to finish with a hope and an aspiration, is that I think within youth work that we can do an awful lot to help contribute to this work and to tackle child poverty, to ensure that the UNCRC is embedded within our communities. But we need to ensure that there is a strengthened youth work sector out there to do, and to ensure that we continue to invest in youth work across our communities, because we know that we're under significant pressure at the moment. Unfortunately, similar to incorporation, we've got a delay in the launch of the youth work strategy, but we look forward to government announcing what that will look like, because again, it's about making sure that we're equipped at local level across public authorities, but also with our third sector colleagues, to make sure that we have the tools and resources to support our children and young people tackle some of the significant challenges that they face living here and now in Scotland. So thanks very much, and we'll take any questions at a later point. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin, and thank you, Louis, and thank you for sharing that really comprehensive approach to your participation, but also the very real challenges that places both for you as an organisation trying to engage with young people, but also recognising the limitations on young people and their capacity and desire to engage in some of the topics that you might be looking for them to view or to share their views on as well. So thank you for sharing those perspectives with us. We now have some time to take questions from you out there all across Scotland. You've got the opportunity to ask our panel members and our presenters any questions that you might have, but we'd also really like to hear some of your practice as well. If you're working on these issues and you'd like to tell other people about them, please feel free to do that. So you can pop your hand up if you want to ask a question, and I can see some coming through in the chat as well. Let's see. Anybody got a question? Anyone would want to raise their hand just now? All forming your thoughts. Let's see. Sue, can I come to you? And I think you've put a question in the chat as well, but do you want to come in?
Yes, can you hear me?
We can, yeah. Just up, if you can turn up your sound a little bit, that would be good.
It's a question I put in the chat because I think it's one that's never been discussed. And it's really important that we look at whether we're baking inequality into our educational system. And one of the reasons it doesn't get discussed so much is that young children are difficult to consult with and actually can't really articulate what's going on around them very often because they're still immature. So we know from research that there's a developmental gap, a serious one, in language and problem-solving skills, but we aren't addressing development at age 5, which is the age it's identified. We're addressing literacy and numeracy. And as a former primary head teacher and a specialist in literacy, I believe firmly that this is actually damaging large numbers of children because they need to get their language and their problem solving and other aspects of development sorted first. So would you agree that we've got a problem here? It doesn't seem to be helping our work on the poverty-related attainment gap. It's actually probably doing more damage.
Anyone like to come in that, Bruce?
Yeah, and Sue, thanks for your ongoing leadership on this issue. I agree. The early years has been a huge focus for our work, and there's some amazing innovative work happening in Scotland around supporting children's development. It's one of the groups that I'm most concerned about in terms of the consequences of COVID. It's where we're seeing kind of most some of those transitions, but children who were very, very young or born during COVID or going through that transition to primary. Yeah, it's a group that we already knew that we needed to focus more on the type of kind of supportive play-based environments that helped development. So absolutely share your concern. It's a concern that I hear in primary schools. It's a concern I hear in the early years sector. Linked to that concern, I would say, is a really major emerging concern, historical concern, but becoming worse, in the cuts that we're seeing at the moment in early years. So a number of people have talked about youth work, which I'm hugely concerned about as well. But we're seeing really severe cuts at the moment in early years, and this is the age group where I think we need to be focusing significant additional support in at the moment, because of the link to development and within the poverty work, very young children are identified as a particularly vulnerable group. More broadly than that, for all of the reasons that you've written about extensively, the support for development. So I'm really concerned that we're actually taking money out of early years at the moment, rather than investing significant more money into early years. So I know we could talk at length about this, but I'm really concerned about that we seem to be going in the wrong direction in terms of the importance that we place on early years and development, and there are very strong links to poverty and inequality here.
Thank you. Martin, did you want to come in on that point as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we need to continue to ensure investment is there for early years work across Scotland. We know that if we don't get it right at that very early stages, it means that it's going to cost a lot more later on in life to try and fix the situation that might have arisen within that individual or that family or that community's life. I suppose for me, it's about how do we work together better as partnerships to be able to ensure that we're supporting our children and our parents at a younger age. For me, within the youth and employability service that we here that I manage here in Shetland, very much that's the approach that we're taking, is trying to work collaboratively across the council to make sure that we are supporting our children from an early stage. And I think that's really key, because again, we can support parents and guardians potentially, for example, into employability programs, but we need to get them together and work in family groups. And again, looking at Bruce was in Shetland for a visit and came along to one of our young mums groups that we run here in Shetland, and it's those initiatives that I think need real investment in, because that is about bringing both children and families together and working with the likes of ourselves in youth work to be able to deliver better outcomes. So I think it's really key that our early years teams in local authorities are invested in, but again, it's that community lens that's I think is really important, so that they're embedded and feel part of that wider community.
Could I come in there, please?
And just we've got a really good question in the chat, so if you don't mind, I'm going to come to that, because it's a really good question, and one that we hear quite a lot from local level. And this is from someone who is working in a school with additional support needs, working towards silver accreditation, I presume, of rights respecting schools. They're saying our school is very supportive. However, the services around us are so stretched, it sometimes feels contradictory to educate on rights when they can't access the services that they really need. How do you talk around this? I'm going to come to Bill, because you've got your hand up to come in on the last point, but I think this one is also really relevant. Is that okay? And so I'll come back to you.
I did want to come in on the last point, because I think parents face impossible choices nowadays. 2/3 of the children living in poverty are in a working household. And all the evidence suggests that unless both parents are working, if they're on low wages, then they won't escape poverty. So the parents face the choice: do we both go into work, and the child's development is impacted, especially if they can't get quality childcare, which helps the child to socialise and develop the language and literacy skills. So, there was very little to cheer about last week's budget, but the one area that I would suggest is the additional investment in childcare for younger children could have a real impact on some of these issues, and help to develop childcare which is genuinely supportive of parents who are faced with these very, very difficult choices. And I have to agree, we need to get a much more holistic approaches in terms of the support that we're offering, and across services. And just to add, I too was in Shetland about 6 weeks ago on holiday, but I did take the opportunity to meet with a couple of staff from your Anchor project in Shetland. I think it's doing really interesting, innovative and holistic work in supporting families on low income, and we need to see more of that. And if a small authority like Shetland can develop sort of approaches like that, it speaks to the ability of other authorities to do similar work, where we try and begin to connect up anti-poverty initiatives, educational opportunities, employability opportunities, etc., so that the offer that's made isn't just for the one service, but actually meets all your family's needs. And in doing so, we begin to tackle some of the fundamental issues that we're confronted by, because these families don't face just one problem, they face several, and there's a lot of barriers to overcome. And often we just deal with the one and then say cheerio and they're off, whereas we could be offering so much more and really assisting them. So, I trust the professionals working in that space. We just need to get better at working together with one another to give the greatest amount of assistance at the same time.
Thank you, Bill. Lydia, can I bring you in?
Hi, I'm happy to come in and talk to Carolyn's question in the chat around how you communicate about rights when people are trying to access services that are stretched and they're not necessarily able to access them. This question, in a slightly different form, was one that we considered quite a lot at the beginning of this project, especially talking about economic, social and cultural rights to people that are not able to access them often, as we know that poverty impacts our ability to access pretty much, access and enjoy all of our human rights to some degree. And the way that I often have phrased it or spoken about it as they were kind of promises that were made to us when when the international law was signed up to, but things have got in the way, and that we're trying to work towards a Scotland where we can have all of these things because you should have them, because the international community and our governments came together and decided that those were the things that we needed. And so we should be able to access them. The fact that we can't is an injustice, but we need to take steps towards having those things because we deserve them. And it's kind of that's been the language that I use with young people. With adults, it's been slightly different, but it's along the same lines of the idea that this should be the North Star that we work towards, because we all should have these things by virtue of being human. And I've also found that I find it useful to trace where rights came from as a way to kind of ground them in why they exist, and then also explain that the fact that we don't have them is a state failure, if that makes any sense at all.
Thank you, Lydia. It's really, really helpful. I think it echoes some of the comments that were made earlier as well. We've got another question that came in advance of today from someone who can't be here but wants to pick up on the event afterwards. And it's picking up on the fact that in the latest Child Poverty Delivery Plan, the Scottish Government emphasises the importance of providing targeted support to families, or to priority families, sorry. In your opinion, how does prioritising certain family types fit in with the ideas of equality and non-discrimination? And I know, Bill, you spoke about the panel principles earlier, of which it talks about non-discrimination and equality. So quite a complex question. Do you want to have a go at answering that one?
I will try. I think equality and treating people equally often gets confused. Treating people all the same does not necessarily result in equality, because people start from different places. We essentially handicap children living in poverty and then expect them to perform at the same level as everyone else and running the race, to get qualifications, to get a good job, etc. So to address that, we need to sometimes, say that support has to be targeted. So I think, we could have, for example, paid every family in Scotland more money rather than adopting the Scottish Child Payment. And there are arguments in favour of that. I'm a great supporter of universalism. I'd like to see universal free school meals, because then it removes any stigma. But if we had directed support to every family in Scotland, we couldn't probably have given as much support to the low-income families. And they're the ones that desperately need it, especially just now during the cost of living crisis. So in some ways, I'm very glad that we adopted the approach that we did, which was to target support to those that need it most. And in some ways, it goes to employability as well. Disabled people, we look at the workforce and the labour market. Over half of disabled people with working age are not in work. They're not starting from the same place as non-disabled people seeking employment. So they need extra assistance to increase their skills, but also just to help them get an interview, to get their foot in the door with employers. And there's a lot of good work going on in terms of connecting employers and potential employees and reducing the barriers, not necessarily eliminating them, but reducing the barriers to that first offer of getting an interview, where at least you got the chance of getting recruited. So I do genuinely believe in inequality, but as I say, to achieve equality, sometimes you have to target resources or assistance on those groups, and the priority groups, I would argue, lone parents, disabled people, Black and minority ethnic households, etc. And going back to one of the main reason that families move into poverty is their first child, having a child young, etc. So we know the families most likely to be at risk of poverty. We need to start thinking about how do we put them on a more equal footing with everybody else. And in some cases, that will be saying, we've got scarce resources, that's what everybody's saying. We need to use those resources in the most effective way possible to lift the greatest number of people out of poverty and to mitigate poverty where we can't lift them out yet. Hope that satisfies. Yeah.
Thank you, and I think that will be really helpful for people out there who are thinking about the priority families and developing their next local child poverty action report as well. And I know, Bruce, you mentioned some other groups of children and young people that we can see local authorities considering in terms of their local child poverty action reports, namely care experienced children and young people, often included alongside the priority families as well. If we've got time for one more question, if anyone's got anything that they want to ask our panelists. Okay, so we've got a question in the chat, which I think you can read, but says, I work as a play specialist in a children's hospital and regularly use the children's young people voices to improve a range of services we offer. Poverty is something I see on a daily basis and guide families to relevant areas of help and support when required. Could someone advise on where further training, courses, information sessions on a range of children's rights topics can be found that could be used within our services? Absolutely, there is lots of help and support out there. I think together Children's Alliance of Children's Rights have a range of resources on their website. Bruce's team in the Commissioner's Office have a range of resources as well. And we also have a Knowledge Hub group as part of the Improvement Services implementation project, and there's lots of resources available on there that you're very welcome to join that group and access resources. Bruce, if I missed anything in particular that you would point her to?
No, I think that's great. I think also the work that you're doing with the improvement service is really useful in terms of sharing some of the locally designed kind of emerging things, because the best training, of course, is the stuff that you're able to help develop yourself and share. And so on our website, I think we've got some stuff up about some of the universities that do some really good training courses. There's some free ones done by the Council of Europe and UN bodies. So there's lots of kind of stuff around, but I think making it as practical as possible is really useful. So I think that's one of the key things, is kind of sharing some good practice. And I think, again, the work the Improvement Service and others are doing is really useful on that score. But yeah, again, please feel free to get in contact with my office, and we can point you to the range of resources that are available.
And there will be also the development of a new skills and knowledge framework to support the implementation of the UNCRC, and we can share some more information with you about that as well as that develops. We've got a very few minutes left, and I know that we heard from children and young people through the work of the Cost of the School Day project, and Kirsty Campbell is with us to share a little piece of information about a network that's available. Kirsty, are you here?
Hi. Yeah,
Hi.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
You can, yes. Hello.
Hello. Thank you for having me. I'm going to try and share 5 slides, so hopefully they'll just pop up just now. Give them 2 seconds, and I promise I will not do death by PowerPoint. Great. Can everyone see that okay? Is that all right, Rebecca? Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much for letting me come along and speak about our latest venture, which is our Children and Young People's Network, which is looking at the cost of the school day. Ideally, as we're working with young people, we will get a much better, a much jazzier name made up by the young people. But for just now, the cost of the school day, Children and Young People's Network, essentially does what it says on the tin. So really, at Cost of the School Day, it's always been about hearing from children and young people about what are the cost barriers at school, what does it feel like to go to school if you can't take part in everything, and also really crucially, looking at really practical ways to mitigate those costs, to reduce those cost pressures, and to make sure that young people have that equitable experience of school, and that everyone can thrive from it. I'm just going to take control of it because I think it's trying to move itself. So out of a lot of the Cost of the School Day work, what we were finding was happening really organically and really naturally is actually young people getting really inspired and wanting to take the lead on this in their own schools. So young people, whether that was young people working on rights respecting schools, or they were part of a pupil equity group or a general youth voice group, young people themselves were very clearly understanding the link between poverty and how that violates their rights, and how essentially poverty is not creating all the conditions and the spaces where everyone in that school can flourish and thrive and really get the best from their education. And there's some really amazing groups that have set themselves up in schools who are doing their own awareness raising in school. They're supporting their cluster primary schools to look at policies and practices. And that can be looking at a wide range of different costs at schools. So whether that's looking at their uniform policy, understanding who needs help with homework, how are young people accessing devices when we're in a world where technology is very important, but actually being able to charge your device at home is not something that's going to be able to happen. And really off the back of this is where our Young People's Network has come from. And a bit like yourself, Lydia, I've been doing trialling some workshops with some young people looking at a rights-based poverty approach and awareness raising around cost of the school day. And although obviously we know that poverty has wide-reaching consequences across all children's rights, these sort of 4 key rights that you see up on the slide are the 4 that have been identified by the young people that we've been talking to. And as has been said throughout this session, is ultimately they want to be heard, and we can't make those changes. We can't support young people in schools if we're not actually hearing about what is that like for young people to go to school and to not be able to purchase the uniform, to not be able to go on a school trip, to be getting in trouble because they don't have the resources for homework. So amongst sort of looking at those workshops with young people, our network, we're actually putting out this call to action. We have been mapping those groups in schools that are currently doing that work, but also looking to support other schools and other local authorities that may wish to get on board and start their own cost of the school day groups, or get their young voice or people young voice forums involved in some of this work. We're doing quite a wide range of young people from P5 all the way up to S6. And as much as I think poverty can be a really difficult topic to talk about, young people are fantastic at actually just cutting across the noise and telling you exactly what they think. I'm going to tell you my favourite quote from a couple of weeks ago was from a primary 5-year-old who really quite directly told us about free school meals and how they wouldn't be getting their free school meal in primary 6 and primary 7, and that they didn't agree with this, and that after all, they had to be at school, they needed to eat to be able to learn, so they should be fed, which I really quite enjoyed that candour around that young person. So young people are absolutely in the right place to be able to tell us, what do we need to do policy-wise, what do we need to do in practice to support removing school costs and ultimately ensuring young people on low incomes are getting the benefit of school. So along with joining our Cost of the School Day network and going in and speaking to young people about the work that they're doing, we're also looking to do some big questions of the month, looking at some key issues around school costs with young people and making sure that that is feeding into policy, that young people's voices are being heard across a range of places. So whether that's looking at school-based policy, local authority, or those wider commitments from the government. And alongside this piece of work, we're also really interested in what a lot of young people have been saying around tackling stigma. And ultimately, again, young people saying, well, I think we're the group who can do that. So lots of really interesting stuff from young people about the unhelpful attitudes they've been hearing around poverty, wanting to know the correct ways to tackle this amongst their peer groups, but more importantly, amongst the adults that are in their lives. So potential future work where we'd like to work with these groups of young people to create those resources that tackle stigma and ultimately can support other groups to set themselves up, whether it's in school or in a local community setting. So our big question, we're hoping to launch our first one in about May. And our questions are going to look around maybe some big key things. We know that school trips are still really out of reach for many children on low incomes. We know there are still young people potentially without devices, so having those barriers in school. So these are going to form some of our sort of big key questions. And just like was mentioned in Shetland, we know that young people can often feel quite over-consulted, or they want to know what's the point. So it's really important for us that we sort of put these big questions out, that we're identifying who are we telling about this, who are we taking this information to. We need to make sure that young people can input in a variety of ways. So whether that's a Jamboard or filming a little piece on their phone, taking part in a quick poll or a quick quiz, making sure that it's really nice and accessible and a variety of ways that young people can take part. And ultimately, I suppose the most important one is making sure we actually go back to young people and saying, this is what you told us, this is what you thought, this is who we have told. this is potential next steps. So really important around that participation, that young people understand and know where that information's gone, how that's going to help, etc. You'll see just a wee quote there from a young person in a school in Murray, and they put it quite clearly, you know, well, if we're not heard, then we can't make a difference. So I'm really putting a call out today. We've had some wonderful schools sign up and a couple of local authority youth voice forums, but if within your setting you are interested in looking at how school costs can have an impact on a young person and you would like to take part in the network, get involved in our big question, please do get in touch with myself. Hopefully my information will come up there. If not, I will stick it in the chat box and send the presentation round afterwards. So hopefully that was just about 5 minutes, and thank you very much. That's great. Cheers.
Thank you so much, and thank you for sharing all of that information with us. And I'm sure those on the call will be really keen to get involved. We are slightly over time, so thank you so much for sticking with us, those of you who are still here. And I think it's just left me to say a very sincere thank you to Bill, to Bruce, Lydia, Louis, Martin and Kirsty for your inputs today and for sharing your insights and comments with us. Some really useful reminders in terms of our work on children's rights and tackling poverty. Bruce spoke about the importance of using the range of levers available at all levels of government to tackle child poverty. We spoke about the opportunity to see the UNCRC as a way to begin new conversations with people that lead to dignified solutions based on the voices of children and young people experiencing poverty. And we heard really as a positive take on how the UNCRC incorporation can lead us to having new ways to consider child poverty and encourage us to use the maximum resources we have available to put the best interests of children at the heart of what we're doing and to work towards better outcomes for all children and young people. So thank you all for sharing that work with us. And for the local perspectives on engaging with children and young people as well. Thank you so much. If you are looking for help and support to get ready for incorporation in your local authority, please do get in touch with us. The contact details are in the chat. And also help and support available with your work on your local child poverty action report is also available through the improvement service. So please don't hesitate to get in touch with us. Join our Knowledge Hub groups, and hopefully we will see you at future Children's Rights Conversations events as well. Bruce, very best of luck to you in your next endeavour, and thank you for all of your work for our children across Scotland and particularly on child poverty. Very good luck to you. And we will see you all again soon. Have a nice cup of tea and a stretch, having sat through this conversation. But thank you for being with us today.